Hello students, this is Frederick sir here. In this particular module, I am going to speak on the French Revolution, the first chapter of your book History. In this module, I will be speaking on two short subtopics from French Revolution. First, the ancient regime and its crisis, and the French society during the late 18th century. So let us move to the first subtopic, that is the ancient regime and its crisis. Here we'll come to know who ruled France in the year 1789 and what was the reason it fell into crisis and the revolution began. Why did the people of France revolted against the ancient regime? France was ruled by the Bourbon family of kings. The Bourbon dynasty ruled the country France. But on 14th July 1789 in the morning, Paris was in a state of alarm. The capital city, Paris, was in a state of alarm. So shocked. Why? Because the king had commanded troops to move into the city. The soldiers were asked by the king to move into the city. For what? But the rumor spread that the king would order the army to open fire upon the citizens. Without any reason, on the innocent citizen, the troop would open fire blindly. This was the rumor that spread across the country. That is why some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall and decided to form a people's militia. A people militia is a group of military formed by the citizens of the country to fight against the troops, the army of the king. They broke into a number of government buildings in search of arms, thinking that the arms, the armaments, weapons would be hidden in the government buildings. So these people's militia, about 7,000 men and women, attacked and broke into the government buildings in search of the arms. Several hundred people marched towards the eastern part of the city and stormed the fortress prison, the Bastille. The Bastille was the prison, central prison, where the people marched towards it and broke into the fortress prison, where they hoped to find hoarded ammunition, where they thought that the ammunition, the arms were stored. The commander of the Bastille, the prison, was killed and the prisoners released. So this particular fortress prison was completely demolished by this angry mob, angry people's militia. There are many more rioting, many more protests, violent protests, both in Paris and the countryside, in the village side. Everywhere this riot, this protest spread across the country. People were protesting against the high price of bread, high price of food, basic materials all were in high price. People were angry, and there are many other reasons that people were against the king. We'll be knowing in the next slides, in the next subtopic. It was the beginning of a chain of events that ultimately led to the execution of the king in France. Finally, the Louis king, who was from the Bourbon family ruling the country France, was executed by the militia. So let us move to the next slide with the next subtopic, French society during the late 18th century. So how the society was constructed during this time in 1774 during the Louis XVI. In 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. He was crowned as the king of France in 1774. During this time when he was king, the treasury was empty. What were the causes for an empty treasury of France under Louis XVI? Long years of war had drained the financial resources of France because France was involved in so many wars against other countries. So, because of war, the government had to finance a lot, lots of expenditure went in wars. That is why the treasury was empty. There was no economic balance, there was no money left in the treasury. High cost of maintaining extravagant court, the immense palace of Versailles. The court, the palace of King Louis XVI in Versailles was so extravagant, so luxurious, so expensive that to maintain the court, the palace, it took lots of expenditure. Under Louis XVI, France held 13 American colonies to gain their independence from the common enemy Britain. As you know, Britain had colonized countries around the world. In the same way, America was colonized by Britain, and Britain had about 13 colonies which were held by France to be freed from Britain. For freeing these American colonies, Louis XVI had to spend lots of money on it. The war added more than a billion livres to a debt. Livres during that time, the unit of currency, that had already risen to more than 2 billion livres. France had taken lots of loan, about a billion of livres from other countries to face the expenditure of the war, of maintaining palace, maintaining the army, and so on. This rose to 2 billion livres because of the interest that France had to pay, which France was unable to pay. Lenders who gave the state credit now began to charge 10% interest on loans. So France had no money left in the treasury to deal with all these problems, to pay back the loans or to finance for war and all that. So the treasury of France was completely empty and France was in economic crisis. That is where the prices of essential goods rose rapidly and people were so angry against the king, against the government. French society in the 18th century was divided into three estates. This was one of the reasons that the French people were against the king. There were three estates. We'll go one by one. The member of the first estate, that is the clergy or the priest, the Christian priest, enjoyed privileges by birth. The moment one belonged to a priestly family, they had ample of privileges that they enjoyed. The most important of these were exemption from paying taxes to the state. To the government, the priestly family, the first estate, did not pay any tax to the government. They were free from any tax. Those were the privileges that they enjoyed by their birth. The second estate were the nobility, the landlords, the rich, the capitalists. They enjoyed feudal privileges by birth. Feudal privileges, zamindari. Yes, they had lots of land which were given to the poor peasant to cultivate, but they did not pay any tax to the government. This included feudal dues. Even they collected feudal dues, feudal taxes from the peasants, poor peasants, but those taxes were not given to the states, which they extracted from the peasants. They were also exempted from paying taxes. This both first and second state paid not even a single tax to the government to the Louis XVI. The third estates, comprised of peasants, artisans, landless laborers, servants, lawyers, doctors, administrative officials, traders, and all other people beside the first is clergy and second state nobility were under third estate. These all had to pay all taxes to the state. Only the third state had to pay all the taxes, and the first state and the second state had to pay none. So this created imbalance, inequality in the society, in the French society between these three estates. Peasants made up about 90% of the populations. However, only a small number of them owned the land they cultivated. That is, very poor farmers, little land they owned, but the most of the land, acres and acres of land, are owned by the nobility, even by the clergy. So these lands were given to the poor peasant for cultivation, and the poor peasant had to pay taxes to the state and taxes to the first and the second states. Peasants were obliged to render services to the lord, to the nobility, to the rich. All these peasants had to give all the services like work in his house and fields, serve in the army, or to participate in building roads. All the poor people do all the construction work, but they had to bear the expenses of the state. The church to extracted its share of taxes called tithes. So even peasants, all the third estate people had to give taxes to the clergy, to the first estate, the member of the church, and even to the state, to the Louis XVI. So both sides, the peasants, the third state had to pay taxes to that. All members of the third state had to pay taxes to the state. None of them were exempted from, including a direct tax called taille and a number of indirect taxes like which were levied on articles of everyday consumption like salt or tobacco and any other purchase they did. Everywhere they were taxed. But the first estate and the second state, that clergy and nobility, were completely exempted from paying taxes and they were privileged by birth. So this created inequality in the society, in the French society, and which caused the third estate to revolt against the King Louis XVI, the government, and that is where the French Revolution begins. So these were the causes because the priest and the nobility were on the top rank in the society, whereas the third estates were considered completely low ranked, inferior to these both, and this created the inequality, imbalance, and the discrimination in the society, which led to French Revolution. Hope all of you must have understood. If not, you can clarify in the class. Thank you.